All right, let's jump right in. Have you ever stopped to think if speaking up for someone, trying to be their voice actually helps? Or could it, maybe, be doing more harm than good? That's the huge question we're tackling today, and we're going to do it by diving into one of the most famous and famously difficult essays out there, Gayatri Spivak's Can the Subaltern Speak? Seriously, this is a piece that makes you question everything you think you know about power, voice, and what it really means to represent someone.
So let's just get right to it. Can we really speak for other people? I mean, truly. Especially when we're talking about folks who've been pushed to the margins, who've been silenced. On the surface, it sounds like such a good, noble thing to do, right? But, and this is a big but, Spivak really challenges us to look way, way closer at that assumption.
And here's where it gets really tricky. What if, and just think about this for a second, what if the very act of trying to give a voice to the voiceless is actually part of the problem? What if, with all our best intentions, our attempts to speak for the oppressed end up just strengthening the very systems that keep them down? That, right there, is the massive paradox Spivak throws at us.
So, to really unpack this, we've got to turn to the source, Gayatri Spivak. She's a giant in postcolonial theory, and her work is all about digging into the messy, lasting impacts of colonialism. And we're not just talking about land or economics. We're talking about something deeper, about who controls knowledge, who controls language, who even gets to speak, and who is always systematically shut down.
Okay, so to really get to the heart of her argument, we need to be clear. Who exactly are we talking about when we use a phrase like the voiceless? Well, Spivak has a very specific, very powerful term for this group.
And that term is the subaltern. So what does that actually mean? A subaltern isn't just someone who's poor or oppressed. It's someone who is so far outside the established power structures, they're not even on the map. They're kept down not just by money, but by class, gender, race, you name it. And the key thing is, they're completely locked out of public debate. They have no way to represent themselves in the systems that matter.
Now, it's important to know Spivak didn't just pull this word out of thin air. It has a whole history. It actually starts with the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci, who used it to talk about classes like peasants and workers. Then, you had the Subaltern Studies Group, a bunch of amazing South Asian historians who took the term and used it to write history from the bottom up, focusing on the everyday people under colonial rule. But then comes Spivak, and she gives it this really critical, sharp twist. For her, the subaltern isn't just any oppressed person. It's someone so completely on the fringes that the systems in power literally cannot hear them. It's like they're speaking a language no one in charge can or will understand.
All right, so this brings us to the absolute core of the argument. How does trying to represent someone actually end up silencing them? It sounds totally backward, right? Well, Spivak argues that when well-meaning intellectuals, or activists, or even colonial officials try to speak for the subaltern, they end up accidentally wiping out that person's own thoughts, their own agency.
And to show us exactly how this works, Spivak gives us this incredibly powerful and pretty intense historical example. It all centers on the British colonial debate in India over the practice of Sati, the Hindu ritual where a widow would be burned on her husband's funeral pyre.
So, let's break down the two main arguments in this debate. On one side, you have the British colonialists. They're saying, this is barbaric. We have to step in and save these poor, oppressed brown women. Okay. Then on the other side, you have Hindu nationalists who are pushing back, saying, this is our sacred tradition. The women are choosing this. It's an act of free will. But wait a minute. Do you see who's completely missing from this picture? The woman. Her voice is gone. Both sides are claiming to know what she wants, talking right over her.
Spivak sums up this entire dynamic with this absolutely brilliant, unforgettable line, white men are saving brown women from brown men. Get it? The woman at the very center of this, whose life is on the line, she's not a person in this debate. She's just a symbol, a pawn in a power game being played between two different groups of men, the British colonizer and the local patriarchs. Her own voice? Totally, completely erased.
And Spivak has a name for this kind of silencing. She calls it epistemic violence. Now, this isn't physical violence, it's something different. It's a kind of violence that happens through knowledge, through speech and writing, through the official stories we tell in history books and the laws we pass. It's the act of erasing a group's ability to even have a history, to have a voice. It's literally writing people out of their own story.
But Spivak doesn't stop there. She takes this idea even deeper with a second, and honestly even more tragic, example. This is where she shows us just how profound the silence can be for a subaltern woman, who, as Spivak argues, is even more deeply in shadow because she's facing a double whammy, oppression from colonialism and from patriarchy.
Here, Spivak looks at the real-life story of a young woman named Bhuvaneswari Bhaduri. She was a teenager in Calcutta who hanged herself back in 1926. And here's a key detail. She was secretly part of an anti-colonial resistance group. Now, her death was a complete mystery. At the time, the automatic assumption for a young woman's suicide was a secret, illegitimate pregnancy. But there was this one crucial detail her family knew. She had waited until she was menstruating to take her life. And this was a deliberate act. It was her way of proving to the world that she was not pregnant.
So, if it wasn't pregnancy, what was she trying to say? This is where Spivak's analysis comes in. She suggests it was a coded political message. See, Bhaduri had been given an assignment by her resistance group, a political assassination, that she just couldn't bring herself to do. So, her suicide was her response. By timing it with her menstruation, a state that would have made her impure and thus ineligible for a traditional Sati, she was trying to rewrite the script to send a political message through her body. But here's the heartbreaking part. Nobody got it. The message was completely unreadable because it didn't fit into any of the stories people had for why a woman would kill herself.
And this is what leads Spivak to our most devastating point. For the subaltern woman, who is silenced by both colonialism and patriarchy, even her most desperate attempts to speak aren't just ignored, they're literally incomprehensible. They can't even be read as speech. She is, in Spivak's own words, even more deeply in shadow.
So, where does all of this leave us? Well, it brings us to the essay's thunderous conclusion. The one that's super famous, but also really misunderstood.
Spivak's final provocative statement is simply this: the subaltern cannot speak. And wow, has that line sparked a lot of arguments over the years.
But what on earth does she mean by that? Of course the subaltern isn't literally mute. People can make sounds, form words. But for Spivak, speaking is more than just making noise. It's a two-way street. It's a transaction. It needs a speaker, yes, but it also needs a listener who is able and willing to hear and understand them within the dominant system. And for the subaltern, that circuit is just broken. Their words go out, but they don't land. They can't be heard in a way that actually matters or creates change.
So why does this essay still matter so much? Well, for one, it completely shook up academia, forcing scholars and writers to really check their own privilege and their role in all of this. It also put gender front and center in conversations about colonialism. But it's more than just a critique. It's really a call to action. Spivak is suggesting that the real goal isn't just to give the subaltern a voice. The real work is to tear down the very structures that create a subaltern at all.
And that brings us to the final question, the one that turns this whole analysis right back onto us. It's a question for anyone who tries to help, anyone who tells stories, anyone who wants to make the world better. When we step up to speak for others, whose story are we really telling? Is it theirs, or is it our own?